In a quiet, affluent suburb, a simple afternoon stroll turns into a nightmare when a black nanny is falsely accused of kidnapping the white children in her care. Without asking questions, the police arrive, guns drawn, ready to tear apart her world. But what happens next exposes the deep-rooted prejudice hiding beneath the surface of even the most picturesque communities. Before we jump into today's story, drop a comment to let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. It was a sunny Tuesday afternoon, and the quiet suburban streets of Boulder Hill, Illinois, felt almost too perfect. Rows of identical houses with manicured lawns lined the road, each one a testament to the peaceful affluence of the neighborhood. There were no sounds of car horns or loud conversations, just the occasional bird chirping and the distant hum of a lawnmower. Tanya wiped the sweat from her forehead and glanced down at the two young children walking beside her. Lily, a bright-eyed 5-year-old, was skipping along the sidewalk, her blonde hair bouncing with each hop. Her younger brother, Max, clutched Tanya's hand tightly, his small fingers warm in hers. At 3, Max was quieter, more introspective, but he followed his sister's lead without question. "Look, Tanya," Lily pointed at a passing squirrel, eyes wide with excitement. "Do you think he's going to find acorns?" Tanya smiled warmly. "Maybe. You know, squirrels have to store up food for winter, so he's probably looking for something tasty." Lily giggled and continued skipping, her mind now filled with images of squirrels preparing for the cold months ahead. Max, however, stayed close to Tanya, his face serious as he watched the world around him. Tanya had been working with the Dawson family for nearly 2 years. The parents, Emily and Frank, were professionals with demanding schedules, but they adored their children and had entrusted Tanya with their care. Tanya loved her job. It wasn't always easy, but it brought her joy to watch the kids grow and develop. She knew these walks were one of the highlights of their day. As they turned the corner, heading down Sycamore Drive, Tanya noticed Mrs. Perkins standing by her rose bushes. The elderly woman had lived in the neighborhood for decades and was known for being a bit of a busybody. She kept an eye on everything, always watching, always judging. Today, her gaze was locked on Tanya. Tanya wasn't surprised. She had felt Mrs. Perkins's stares before. The older woman had never been outwardly rude, but her eyes always lingered a little too long. It was as if she couldn't quite understand why a black woman was walking through these streets with 2 white children. Tanya tightened her grip on Max's hand, reminding herself not to overthink it. She had a job to do, and she wasn't going to let some nosy neighbor ruin her day. But Mrs. Perkins continued to watch, her eyes narrowing as Tanya and the children walked by. Tanya and the children reached the park at the end of the street. It was a small neighborhood park, complete with a swing set and a jungle gym. The kids loved coming here, and it was their usual afternoon routine. As soon as they arrived, Lily dashed towards the swings, her laughter filling the air. "Push me, Tanya," she called out. Tanya gently nudged Max towards the small slide before heading over to give Lily a push. As she stood behind the swing, her thoughts drifted for a moment, relishing the simple beauty of the day. But just down the street, Mrs. Perkins had picked up her phone. She hesitated for a moment, glancing once more towards the park. Something didn't sit right with her. Tanya didn't belong here, not with those children. It didn't matter how many times she'd seen them together. Something about it seemed off today. Her suspicions bubbled up, irrational but persistent. Mrs. Perkins dialed the number. "Hello, yes, I'm calling because there's a situation. There's a woman in the neighborhood with 2 children. She looks suspicious. Yes, she's black and the kids are white. I think something might be wrong." The voice on the other end of the line responded with concern, assuring Mrs. Perkins that they'd send someone to check it out. Tanya stood behind the swing, giving Lily a gentle push every few seconds. The rhythmic motion of the swing was calming, and for a brief moment, Tanya allowed herself to relax. Max had climbed onto the small slide and was cautiously sliding down, giggling as his feet touched the ground. She smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. These kids had become a significant part of her life, almost like family. As the minutes passed, Tanya's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and glanced at the screen. A message from Emily, the children's mother, appeared. "Hope the kids are behaving. We'll be home around 6 today. Thanks for everything, Tanya." She texted back a quick reply. "Of course. We're at the park now. They're having a great time." Tanya slipped her phone back into her pocket, unaware that trouble was already brewing just around the corner. Mrs. Perkins, satisfied with her decision to alert the authorities, stood on her porch and watched the scene unfold at the park. To her, this was an act of vigilance, keeping her neighborhood safe. Her intent, in her mind, was noble. But beneath that self-justification lay something much darker. It was a fear she refused to confront, a prejudice she would never admit to harboring. It wasn't long before the faint sound of police sirens broke the peaceful silence of the afternoon. Tanya, still pushing Lily on the swing, looked up, her heart skipping a beat. Police cars were rare in this part of town. It was quiet here, almost too quiet. As the sound grew louder, she noticed 2 patrol cars turning onto Sycamore Drive, heading in her direction. A strange feeling settled in the pit of her stomach. Lily was still laughing, her carefree joy a stark contrast to the tension Tanya was beginning to feel. Max, noticing the flashing lights in the distance, pointed towards the road. "Look, Tanya! Police cars!" She nodded, her eyes glued to the approaching vehicles. Why were they here? This was an affluent, crime-free neighborhood. Her mind raced through possibilities, none of which included her. But as the cars pulled to a stop near the park, her pulse quickened. 2 officers stepped out, both white men in their 40s. One of them, Officer Hendricks, had a hard expression on his face, the kind of look that made you feel guilty, even if you hadn't done anything wrong. His partner, Officer Talbot, looked more relaxed, but followed closely behind. They approached quickly, their eyes fixed on Tanya. She stood still, unsure of what was about to happen, but instinctively, she knew it wasn't good. "Ma'am," Officer Hendricks called out, his voice loud and authoritative. "Step away from the children." Tanya froze. Her hand, which had been resting on the swing, fell to her side. "Excuse me?" "Step away from the children," he repeated, this time more forcefully. Lily, oblivious to the tension, continued swinging, while Max clung to Tanya's leg, his face now filled with confusion. Tanya's heart raced. What was going on? "I'm their nanny," she said calmly, trying to keep her voice steady. "I work for their parents." Hendricks didn't seem to care. He exchanged a quick glance with Talbot before taking another step forward. "We got a call about a possible abduction. We need you to move away from the kids." Tanya's mouth went dry. "An abduction? No, you've got it wrong. I've been with these kids for 2 years. Their parents are—" Before she could finish, Hendricks grabbed her arm roughly. "Ma'am, I said move." Max began to cry, his small hands clutching at Tanya's jeans. Lily, now fully aware that something was wrong, jumped off the swing and ran over to her brother, trying to comfort him. "Tanya, what's happening?" The panic in the children's voices broke Tanya's heart. She looked at the officers, her voice rising in desperation. "Please, call their parents. They'll tell you who I am. I'm not—" But Hendricks wasn't listening. He twisted her arm behind her back, and Tanya winced in pain. Her mind raced, her thoughts a blur. She could see Mrs. Perkins in the distance, standing on her porch, watching with cold indifference. How could this be happening? Officer Talbot, sensing the situation was spiraling out of control, stepped forward. "Hendricks, maybe we should—" But Hendricks cut him off. "Stay out of it, Talbot. This is protocol." Tanya struggled to stay calm, her voice trembling. "You're hurting me. I didn't do anything." The children were crying now, their faces red and tear-streaked. Max, still holding on to Tanya's leg, screamed for the officer to stop. "Leave her alone! She's our nanny!" Lily, older and slightly more aware, shouted at the top of her lungs. "She didn't take us! We love her!" But Hendricks was unmoved. He had already made up his mind about Tanya the moment he saw her, a black woman with 2 white children. To him, it didn't matter what the kids were saying. In his mind, she was guilty until proven innocent. The park, once filled with laughter and sunshine, had transformed into a chaotic scene. Neighbors started gathering at the edges, watching from a distance, their expressions ranging from concern to suspicion. No one stepped forward to help. They simply watched, unsure of what to do, or worse, unwilling to get involved. Tanya's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the weight of every eye on her, judging her, assuming the worst. The world seemed to close in around her, the walls of prejudice tightening with every second. Officer Talbot finally broke the silence. "Hendricks, let's at least hear her out. The kids are saying—" "I don't care what the kids are saying," Hendricks snapped. "We're here to protect them, not listen to some sob story." Talbot hesitated, clearly conflicted. He looked at the children, then back at Hendricks. "I think we should call their parents." Hendricks glared at him but didn't respond. He tightened his grip on Tanya's arm, leading her towards the patrol car. Tanya's heart raced as she was led toward the patrol car, her mind spinning. The weight of the moment pressed down on her like a heavy fog. She could still hear the children sobbing behind her, their cries piercing through the noise in her head. How had things escalated so quickly? 1 minute, she was enjoying a peaceful walk with Lily and Max, and now she was being treated like a criminal. As they neared the car, she twisted her head back, locking eyes with Talbot. "Please, call their parents," she pleaded, her voice raw. "This is all a misunderstanding." Talbot hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Maybe we should listen to her, Hendricks. The kids are telling the truth, and we haven't even verified—" "Back off, Talbot," Hendricks barked. "I'm handling this." Tanya felt the sting of tears threatening to escape, but she blinked them back. She wasn't going to let herself break in front of them. Not now. Not like this. Just then, a voice broke through the chaos. "What's going on here?" Tanya whipped her head around to see a man jogging up the street toward them. It was Frank, the children's father. He was out of breath, clearly having rushed over as soon as he saw the commotion from his office just a few blocks away. His face was flushed with concern as he looked between Tanya, the officers, and his children, who were still crying uncontrollably. "What the hell is this?" Frank demanded, his eyes narrowing on Hendricks. "Let her go! That's my nanny!" Hendricks's grip loosened slightly, his expression hardening. "Sir, we got a call about a possible abduction. We're just doing our job." Frank's eyes flared with anger. "By assaulting her in front of my kids? You didn't even check with me first?" He looked down at Max and Lily, his face softening momentarily before returning to a cold, hardened gaze directed at Hendricks. "This woman is family to us. She's been with my children for years." Hendricks glanced at Talbot, unsure for the first time since the whole ordeal began. "We were following protocol." Frank stepped closer, his voice lowering, but filled with rage. "Protocol doesn't give you the right to rough up an innocent person. You didn't even bother to check her story. You assumed, and now look at my kids." He gestured toward the sobbing children, their little faces tear-streaked and pale. Lily ran to her father, clinging to his leg. "Dad, they were so mean to Tanya," she cried. "They thought she was stealing us." Max, still trembling, reached for Frank with his tiny hands. "Tanya didn't do anything wrong," he wailed. Frank knelt down and hugged both of his children tightly, his heart breaking at the sight of their distress. He kissed their foreheads before standing up to face the officers again. "I want to speak to your superior. Now." The atmosphere was thick with tension. Hendricks, still holding on to his rigid sense of duty, clenched his jaw but reached for his radio. He called in his superior, explaining the situation in clipped tones. Talbot remained silent, clearly regretting the entire encounter, but unsure how to de-escalate it. Frank stood beside Tanya, his hand resting on her shoulder as if to protect her from any further harm. "You're okay, Tanya. I'm so sorry this happened to you," he said, his voice soft but filled with regret. Tanya nodded, though her throat was tight with emotion. "I don't understand why they didn't just ask," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. Why didn't they just believe me? Frank sighed, shaking his head. Because people like Hendricks see someone like you with my kids, and they jump to conclusions. His voice hardened again as he glanced at the officer. This is what's wrong with the world. As they waited for the superior to arrive, more neighbors began to gather. Some of them whispered among themselves, while others remained silent, simply observing the unfolding drama. A few even had their phones out, recording the event, capturing every moment of the police's overreach. Tanya couldn't help but wonder what they were thinking. Were they on her side, or did they believe the officers had acted appropriately? 15 minutes later, a new police car pulled up, and out stepped a middle-aged woman in uniform, her face lined with experience. Sergeant Myers approached with a calm demeanor, her eyes scanning the scene quickly as she assessed the situation. Frank wasted no time. Sergeant, I want you to understand what's happened here. This officer, he gestured to Hendricks, accosted our nanny in front of my kids without even verifying her identity. He assumed the worst because of her skin color. Myers' face remained impassive, but she nodded. I see. Let me speak with both officers, and I'll get to the bottom of this. She motioned for Hendricks and Talbot to follow her a few paces away, leaving Frank, Tanya, and the children by the patrol cars. As Myers spoke quietly with the officers, Frank crouched down beside his children once more. Hey, it's going to be okay, he said softly. You know Tanya would never hurt you. We're going to fix this. Lily sniffled and nodded. Why did they think she was bad, Dad? Frank sighed heavily. Sometimes people make bad choices because they don't understand. They judge before they know the truth. Max wiped at his eyes with his small hands. But Tanya didn't do anything, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Tanya crouched down beside Max, brushing a tear from his cheek. It's okay, buddy. I'm okay. And you're okay. That's what matters. Across the way, Hendricks was trying to justify his actions to Myers, but she didn't seem impressed. After a few minutes of back and forth, she turned to Frank and Tanya. Mr. Dawson, Ms. Harris, she began, her voice firm but professional. I've reviewed the situation. While the officers were responding to a call, it's clear there was a lack of proper communication and unnecessary force was used. For that, I deeply apologize. Frank crossed his arms, his jaw tight. An apology doesn't erase what happened. My kids were traumatized, and Tanya was treated like a criminal. Myers nodded. I understand, and I take this very seriously. There will be a formal investigation into Officer Hendricks's conduct, and appropriate action will be taken. We'll also be conducting more training to ensure situations like this don't happen again. Tanya looked up at Myers, her voice quiet but steady. What about me? How do I know this won't happen the next time I take these kids out for a walk? Myers met her gaze, her face softening. You have every right to be angry. I can't promise it won't happen again, but I can promise we're working to change the way we respond, starting with this incident. You'll be informed of every step we take. Tanya nodded, though the weight of the day's events still sat heavily on her shoulders. I just want to be treated like everyone else, she said quietly. That's all. As the officers prepared to leave, the atmosphere in the park finally began to calm. Neighbors slowly retreated back to their homes, whispering among themselves. Mrs. Perkins, still watching from her porch, had turned away, her face unreadable. It was clear she'd gotten more than she'd bargained for when she made that call. Frank looked at Tanya, his expression filled with both sadness and gratitude. I don't know what to say, Tanya. I'm sorry this happened to you. It never should have. Tanya managed a small, tight-lipped smile. I know it wasn't your fault, Frank, but this is something I deal with. It's just exhausting. Frank nodded, his eyes filled with empathy. If there's anything I can do, anything at all, just tell me. For a moment, the two stood in silence, both of them processing the events that had just unfolded. The children clung to their father's legs, still shaken, but beginning to calm down. Finally, Tanya sighed. Let's just get the kids home. I think we all need a break. The ride back to the Dawson house was unusually quiet. Frank drove with a tight grip on the steering wheel, his jaw set in frustration. The children were in the back seat, their tears now dried, but their faces still bore the signs of the day's trauma. Tanya sat in the passenger seat, staring out of the window, lost in thought. As they pulled into the driveway, Frank parked the car and turned to Tanya. You don't have to stay any longer today if you don't want to. I can handle things from here. Tanya shook her head. No, I'll stay. I don't want the kids to feel like something's wrong. It's important they see that things are normal, even after all this. Frank nodded, appreciating her resilience. Okay, but you let me know if you need anything. They stepped out of the car, and as they entered the house, Emily, Frank's wife, rushed over, concern written all over her face. What happened? Frank, I saw the police outside the park. Are the kids okay? Lily and Max ran to their mother, hugging her tightly. Emily knelt down, holding them close as she looked up at Frank and Tanya for answers. It's a long story, Frank began, his voice heavy with emotion. Tanya was wrongfully accused of kidnapping the kids. The police... Emily's eyes widened in shock. What? How? Why? She glanced at Tanya, her expression softening. Tanya, I'm so sorry. I can't believe this happened. Tanya offered a faint smile. It's okay, Emily. I'm just glad we're all back home safe. Emily stood, hugging Tanya tightly. You're part of this family. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. We're going to make sure something like this never happens again. As the evening wore on, the house was filled with an unsettling calm. Emily and Frank sat with the kids, trying to distract them with a movie, while Tanya quietly cleaned up in the kitchen. But her mind kept replaying the events of the afternoon. She couldn't shake the feeling of being so quickly judged, of being seen as a threat simply because of the color of her skin. She leaned against the counter, staring at the pile of dishes in the sink. Her hands trembled as she thought about the fear in the children's eyes, the rough grip of Officer Hendricks on her arm, the way Mrs. Perkins had watched from afar with cold indifference. It wasn't just about what had happened today. It was about every other time she'd been judged without reason, every other moment in her life where her humanity had been questioned. The weight of it all pressed down on her, making it hard to breathe. Frank entered the kitchen, his footsteps soft. Tanya, you don't have to do that. Come sit down. Tanya shook her head. I just need to keep busy. Frank sighed, leaning against the door frame. I know today was a lot, but Emily and we're here for you. We want you to know that. Tanya glanced over at him, her eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and exhaustion. Thanks, Frank. It's hard, you know? It's hard knowing that no matter how much good I do, no matter how much I care for these kids, people will still see me as less. Frank's face tightened with emotion. I hate that this happened to you. I hate that this is the world we live in. But we're going to do something about it. This can't go unanswered. Tanya nodded, though deep down, she wondered if anything would really change. She had seen this story play out too many times before. The next morning, Frank made good on his word. He contacted a lawyer and filed a formal complaint against Officer Hendricks and the department. Emily reached out to local media outlets, sharing the story of what had happened to Tanya. Within days, the incident had gained traction, with news reporters showing up at the Dawson house for interviews, and social media buzzing with outrage. Tanya, initially hesitant about all the attention, found herself thrust into the center of a conversation much larger than she had anticipated. She was interviewed by journalists, invited to speak at community meetings, and even featured on a local news segment where she spoke candidly about the challenges of being a Black caregiver in a predominantly white neighborhood. I love these kids, she said during one interview. They're like family to me, but I shouldn't have to prove that to anyone just because of how I look. We need to start seeing people for who they are, not what we assume they are based on skin color. Her words resonated with many, and soon, the story wasn't just about what had happened in that park. It was about the deeper issues of race and prejudice that still existed in communities across the country. As the weeks passed, the ripple effects of the incident continued to spread. The police department launched an internal investigation, and Officer Hendricks was placed on administrative leave. His actions, once deemed protocol, were now under scrutiny. The local community held town hall meetings to discuss issues of racial profiling and police conduct. Tanya found herself invited to speak at some of these meetings, sharing her story with others who had experienced similar forms of discrimination. Each time, she was met with a mix of support and skepticism, but she remained steadfast in her message. "I'm not here to vilify anyone," she said at one meeting, standing before a room full of community members. "But we have to face the truth. We can't keep pretending that these things don't happen or that they're isolated incidents. It's a systemic problem, and it won't change unless we start holding people accountable." Frank and Emily attended each meeting with her, standing by her side, their presence a reminder that this fight wasn't hers alone. They had committed themselves to being allies in the struggle for justice, and their support meant everything to Tanya. Months passed, and while the scars of that day in the park would never fully fade, Tanya began to feel a sense of healing. The investigation into the police department resulted in new training protocols for officers aimed at preventing racial profiling. Officer Hendricks, after being found in violation of department policies, was removed from the force. Though it wasn't a perfect resolution, it was a step in the right direction. Tanya continued to work with the Dawson family, but now with a renewed sense of purpose. She had become more than just a caregiver. She was an advocate, a voice for those who had been silenced by prejudice. And while the journey was far from over, she knew that she had made a difference. One afternoon, as she walked Lily and Max home from school, she noticed something different in the air. Neighbors who once stared at her with suspicion now waved as she passed by. Some even stopped to chat, asking how the kids were doing, expressing their support for what she had been through. The world wasn't perfect, but it was changing. Slowly, surely. As they approached the Dawson house, Lily looked up at Tanya, her blue eyes bright with curiosity. "Tanya, are you okay?" Tanya smiled down at her, feeling a warmth in her chest. "Yeah, Lily, I'm okay." And for the first time in a long while, she truly meant it. The events of that day had changed not just Tanya, but everyone around her. The Dawsons learned the importance of speaking up in the face of injustice. The community became more aware of the biases that existed within their ranks, and the police department, though far from perfect, had taken its first steps toward meaningful change. But the real victory, Tanya knew, was in the message that had spread beyond their quiet suburb. It was a reminder that every person, no matter their race or background, deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. It was a call to action, a plea for a better, fairer world. And as Tanya walked home that day, the sun setting behind her, she knew that, in her own way, she had helped make that world just a little bit better.